discuss this issue in depth, the communications director for the Susan B. Anthony list, Mallory Quigley. Mallory, thank you so much for spending some time with us on America's Forum.
Thank you for having me.
Now, if you can just put this into layman's terms, what does this ruling mean for the Susan B. Anthony list?
Well, the ruling unfortunately means that it's not over. We are going back to the state of Ohio, and it's there in the district court where we are going to fight the constitutionality of the law. The Supreme Court ruled on the standing of our case and said that we do have significant injury and that we can go back now and fight the constitutionality of the law in Ohio.
And let's for a moment, if we can, Mallory, kind of backtrack to what
Sure.
actually transpired in Ohio, if you will.
Sure. Well, you know, in 2010, we just come through this terrible healthcare debate, and the Susan B. Anthony list, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, the Republican Party, at least half of all Americans were saying that the Affordable Care Act would allow taxpayer dollars to go towards abortions. Steve Driehaus and like Bart Stupak agreed with us on this point up until he didn't agree anymore, and accepted the president's executive order, which of course Planned Parenthood President Cecile Richards called a symbolic gesture. So Steve Driehaus and about more than 10 other so-called pro-life Democrats accepted this executive order and went back to their districts and tried to say that they were still pro-life. But we knew that this Obamacare law would be the largest expansion of taxpayer funding of abortion since Roe versus Wade, and that's exact reality has borne out in these last 3 years.
And Mallory, you made this more about an argument of freedom of speech. Can you explain why you chose to go that route?
Certainly. Well, the billboards, we attempted to put up billboards in Steve Driehaus's district in 2010 that said, "Shame on Steve Driehaus, he voted for taxpayer funding of abortion." And Ohio has a false statement law that you can't make a false statement about a politician during an election context. Now,
and you were saying that was subject to review, correct?
We're saying that so the Ohio Election Commission said that there was probable cause that we're lying, and we're saying that this law is unconstitutional on its face, and equally important, we weren't lying. So we're fighting. There's about 15 other states across the nation that have similar laws, and our freedom of speech is being chilled by the existence of this law because we were prevented from speaking the truth to voters during the 2010 midterm elections. We were prevented from putting up the billboards. So our freedom of speech was chilled in 2010, and we don't want to see that happen to anyone in the future.
Well, we know that was subject to debate, and we don't really need to get into the specifics of that, but you were basically saying, your organization was saying that the voters should be the ones to decide, not the government, correct? And what is accurate?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, what happened in Ohio is that the law allows a politically appointed tribunal to decide what is true and what is false in a political context. That is when you're in an election, that is what the voters decide on election day at the ballot box. So we believe that there's a constitutional right to the freedom of speech, and this includes the right of citizens to criticize their elected officials, and we were facing and others could face under this law jail time and fines, ruinous fines. So this is simply unconstitutional.
Mallory, you talk about this, and it seems to me a distinction can be made. And really, we often joke about political science being the ultimate oxymoron. But when you try to have any government agency try to determine, quote, objective truth, and you laid out your case why you wanted to challenge what Steve Driehaus was doing. You had it there, but it seems to me we're dealing with the notion of truth, the notion of falsehood, but the third notion that needs to be taken into account is opinion. Now, you got a unanimous opinion from the U.S. Supreme Court sending this back to Ohio. Mr. Justice Thomas, Clarence Thomas, writing in his opinion, and we quote, "There's a credible threat of enforcement that stymies your group's free speech rights, quote, forcing them to choose between refraining from core political speech on the one hand or engaging in that speech and risking costly commission proceedings and criminal prosecution on the other." So Mallory, as the focus switches back to Ohio, Governor Kasich, anybody in the Ohio legislature going to seek to try and change this Orwellian, quote, Bureau of Truth, a tribunal that, quite frankly, has its own opinions about what happens politically?
Right.
What changes do you see afoot in the Buckeye State?
Well, that remains to be seen. We're going back to the district court, like I said. One interesting thing to note is that the Attorney General of Ohio actually filed an amicus brief on our behalf at the Supreme Court. Because he himself, this happens all the time. Obviously, Ohio is a very important state politically, and this technique, it's a technique used in campaigns to run to the Ohio Election Commission in the heat, a month out from Election Day, and say, put in a complaint, and then however the commission, the tribunal finds, then you can go out and say, oh, my opponent is lying about me, and this completely obscures the truth in our case, or it just obscures the right of voters to make up their own minds. So we'll see what's going to happen in Ohio. I'm not sure.
Mallory Quigley, Communications Director of the Susan B. Anthony List, we thank you for shedding some light and offering your opinion on that unanimous opinion coming out of the United States Supreme Court. Thanks very much.
Thanks for joining
Thank you.
us.
You know, I guess the best way to deal with this, you've seen the picture. It says, what do you see here? Two faces in profile or a goblet, which has to do with perception.
Right, exactly.
And opinions are formed based on fact, but then with conjecture or deductive reasoning, and that becomes opinion. We have plenty of it here, along with news and information, and we welcome your opinions. Tweet us your comments at Newsmax TV, # America's Forum. There's also email and Facebook. Our faces are coming right back.